Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we begin Journal Collection number 25 by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It is in Volume 3 of the public domain collection of his journals, in case anybody is wanting to read along or just note where we are in our journey through the journals. And this collection begins, as I think all of the collections do, in the beginning of the year and then end at the end of the year. I want to say there's a few that aren't like that. Maybe if he had less journal entries, maybe there's 2 years spanned, but I don't remember for sure. Either way, I'll let you know if a year passes and the journal collection doesn't end there. But this begins with a quotation. It says, "Not of men, neither by man." Then there is a quote that says, "May I consult the auguries of time, and through the human heart explore my way, and look and listen." Then there is I believe it might be in Italian. It comes with a footnote. It's a short sentence, and the footnote says, "It was Mr. Emerson's custom after this time to write one or more mottos at the beginning of each journal." So there you go, although I don't know what the quotation says. This also begins with a editorial sort of catching you up to speed on what's going on in Emerson's life, and then when Emerson begins his actual journal entries, I will let you know. So I will begin with the editorial insertion part here. So far as the headquarters of the Emerson family could be determined by the presence of Madame Emerson, it might have been considered at the farm of their kinswoman, Mrs. Ladd, near Newton Upper Falls. Charles may have been there too, but more probably at the manse in Concord, as then or soon after he was studying law in the office of that fine old Roman, Samuel Hoare. Waldo came and went, for during most of the winter he was filling the pulpit of his kinsman, the Reverend Orville Dewey, in New Bedford, occasionally preaching in Plymouth, where he had made the acquaintance of Miss Lydia Jackson, a lady slightly older than himself, whose spiritual mind, refined character, and distinguished bearing caused her to be regarded almost as a lady abbess among her generation and the younger people there. The next year she became Emerson's wife. In New Bedford, Mr. Emerson made many new friends among the liberal Quakers. In January, he delivered a lecture at the Athenaeum in Boston before the Mechanics' Institute. The subject was water, very freely treated after his wont. Later in the winter, he gave 2 lectures on Italy in Boston, and in May one called Naturalist at the annual meeting of the Boston Natural History Society. And then Emerson begins his journal now. "This book is my savings bank. I grow richer because I have somewhere to deposit my earnings, and fractions are worth more to me because corresponding fractions are waiting here that shall be made integers by their addition." January 2nd, 1834. The year, but I have no thought for time. It occurs that a selection of natural laws might be easily made from botany, hydraulics, natural philosophy, etc., which should at once express also an ethical sense. Thus, water confined in pipes will always rise as high as its source. A hairline of water is a balance for the ocean, and its fount be as high. Durable trees make roots first, Charles reads. A cripple in the right road beats a racer in the wrong road. Fractures well cured make us more strong. Action and reaction are equal. Concentrated nourishment is unhealthy. There must be mixture of excrement. January 3rd. To Goethe there was no trifle. Glauber picked up what everybody else threw away. Cuvier made much of the humblest facts. The lower tone you take, the more flexible your voice is. The whole landscape is beautiful, though the particulars are not. You never are tired whilst you can see far. There is no weakness, no exposure for which we cannot find consolation in the thought, well, 'tis a part of my constitution, part of my relation and office to my fellow creature. I like to see the immense resources of the creature. January 5th. Newton, says Fourier, knew not yet the perfections of the universe. What Laplace called great was really great. I read in Herbert a beautiful verse, a high example of what the rhetorician calls the moral sublime. Ah, my dear God, though I am clean forgot, let me not love thee, if I love thee not. January 12th. I was well pleased with Dr. Bradford's view of judgment the other day. Particular men are designated as persons of good judgment. It is merely that they are persons of experience in such affairs as interest most men. Their opinion on any question where they have not experience is worthless. Men of good sense act in certain conjectures in a most imbecile manner. It is because it is their first trial. Others act with decision and success. It is because they have made many trials before, and of course got their failures. Then some men reserve their opinion, and so never speak foolishly. Others publish every opinion they hold, and so, though the first thoughts of all were equally ineffectual and foolish, yet the abstemious have the credit of forming sound opinions the first time, and the prompt speakers, if of active and advancing minds, are always uttering absurdities. January 19th. What is it that interests us in biography? Is there not always a silent comparison between the intellectual and moral endowments portrayed and those of which we are conscious? The reason why the Luther, the Newton, the Bonaparte concerning whom we read was made the subject of panegyric is that in the writer's opinion, in some one respect this particular man represented the idea of man. And as far as we accord with his judgment, we take the picture for a standard man, and so let every line accuse or approve our own ways of thinking and living by comparison. At least I thought thus in reading Jeffrey's fine sketch of Playfair the other evening. January 21st. Is not the use of society to educate the will, which never would acquire force in solitude? We mean will when we say that a person has a good deal of character. Women generally have weak wills, sharply expressed perhaps, but capricious, unstable. When the will is strong, we inevitably respect it in man or woman. I have thought that the perfection of female character seldom existed in poverty, at least where poverty was reckoned low. Is not this because the rich are accustomed to be obeyed promptly, and so the will acquires strength and yet is calm and graceful? I think that an involuntary respect which the rich inspire in very independent and virtuous minds arises from the same circumstance, the irresistible empire of a strong will. There is not, nor ever can be, any competition between a will of words and a real will. Webster, Adams, Clay, Calhoun, Chatham, and every statesman who was ever formidable are willful men. But Everett and Stanley and the Ciceros are not, want this backbone. Meantime, a great many men in society speak strong, but have no oak, are all willow, and only a virtuous will is omnipotent. January 31st. I add that in a former age the men of might were men of will, now the men of wealth. January 22nd. Luther and Napoleon are better treatises on the will than Edwards's. Will does not know if it be cold or hot or dangerous. He only goes on to his mark and leaves to mathematicians to calculate whether a body can come to its place without passing through all the intermediates. Quote, men have more heart than mind. Different faces things wear to different persons. Whole process of human generation how bifronted. To one it is bawdry, to another pure. In the mother's heart every sensation, from the nuptial embrace through the uncertain symptoms of the quickening to the birth of her child, is watched with an interest more chaste and wistful than the contemplations of the nun in her cloister. Yet the low-minded visitor of a woman in such circumstances has the ignorant impertinence to look down and feel a sort of shame. Akin to the pathetic sublime of the two lines of Herbert on the last leaf are the lines of the last canto of Il Paradiso, thus translated, quote, O Virgin Mother, daughter of thy Son, created beings all in loveliness surpassing, as in height above them all. End quote. January 23rd. I cannot read of the Jubilee of Goethe and of such a velvet life without a sense of incongruity. Genius is out of place when it reposes 50 years on chairs of state and inhales a continual incense of adulation. Its proper ornaments and relief are poverty and reproach and danger, and if the Grand Duke had cut Goethe's head off, it would have been much better for his fame than his retiring to his rooms, after dismissing the obsequious crowds, to arrange tastefully and contemplate their gifts and honorary inscriptions. New Bedford, January 29th. Michelangelo's Life and the Library of Useful Knowledge, and His Poverty by Signor Radici and the Retrospective Review, Volume 13. These elevate my respect for the artist. His life, they say, too, was a poem. Beautiful is his Platonic passion before that word had been perverted by affectation and hypocrisy. Burney said of him, E dice cose e voi dite parola. He sought to penetrate by just degrees to the center of that eternal radiance in which is hidden, quote, L'amor che move il sole e le altre stelle, end quote. Are not his struggles and mortifications a more beautiful wreath than the Milner's made for Goethe? In reference to this appetite for death, shall I say it is sometimes permissible that the object of life is answered when the uses of time are discovered? When the soul has far discovered its relation to external truth, that time can never more be of burden, and nothing but the evils inseparable from human condition prevent it from being a heaven? February 1st. In viewing the greatness of men of the first ages, Homer and Alfred equal to Goethe and Washington, does it not seem that a little additional force of will in individual is equivalent to ages full of the improvement we call civilization? But these Anakim do yet yield to the sad observer of his race real and great consolation. I am thinking now of Michelangelo and his Platonism, for they seem to him himself without his faults and in favorable circumstances. He recognizes their lofty aspirations as the thoughts of his own childhood. He looks at these heroes as nothing peculiar and monstrous, but as only more truly men, and he still perceives that a heaven of truth and virtue is still possible. Some thoughts always find us young and keep us so. Such a thought is the love of the universal and eternal beauty. Every man leaves that contemplation with the feeling that it rather belongs to ages than to mortal life. February 2nd. How often our nature is conscious of and labors with its own limits. In the very act of pretension, it is oppressed with secret humiliation. February 3rd. I have read Corinne with as much emotion as a book can excite me. A true representation of the tragedy of woman, which yet, thanks to the mysterious compensation which nature has provided, they rarely feel. The tragedy of genius also. The story labors with the fault of an extravagant, I may say ridiculous, filial passion in Oswald, which no man of such intelligence can carry so far, and then with the second impossibility of his rapid marriage. No matter, though the circumstances are untrue, the position and the feelings of Corinne are possible, and, as Plato would say, more true than history. New Bedford, February 7th. I have been to Plymouth and stood on the rock, and felt that it was grown more important by the growth of this nation in the minutes that I stood there. But Barnabas Hedge ought not, no man ought, to own the rock of Plymouth. Mr. Bond said he had learned that men can never learn by experience. In the last depression of trade he had resolved never to be caught again, and now, amid his perplexities, resolves again. At sea we always judge by the present weather the probable length of the voyage. February 10th. The newspapers say they might as well publish a thunderstorm as a report of Webster's speech in answer to Wright. His tones were like those of a commander in a battle. Times of eloquence are times of terror. I wrote to Charles last night that the obstinate retention of simple and high sentiments in obscurest duties is hardening the character to that temper that will work with honor, if need be, in the tumult or on the scaffold. Yet perhaps the courage of heroes and revolutions is extemporary, and what seems superhuman fortitude is the effect of an ecstasy of sorrow. Evil times have the effect of making men think. I suppose in the last few weeks men have thrown more searching glances at the structure and interdependence of society than in the years of prosperous times. They begin to trace the path of an ear of corn from its stalk to their table. GAS confirmed the views of the Education of the Will, see January 21st, by saying that in his experience a very great change is produced in men by the possession of property, a great additional of force, which would remain to them if their property were taken away. It is not the possession of luxuries, but the exercise of power which belongs to wealth that has wrought this effect. The possession of office has the same effect. What a peppercorn man is if he had been poor! By this education of things and persons he is now a person of decisions and influence. How imbecile is often a young person of superior intellectual powers for want of acquaintance with his powers. Bashful, timid, he shrinks, retreats before every confident person, and is disconcerted by arguments and pretensions he would be ashamed to put forward himself. Let him work as many merchants do, with the forces of millions of property for months and years upon the wills of hundreds of persons, and you shall see him transformed into an adroit, fluent, masterful gentleman, fit to take and keep his place in any society of men. This is the account to be given of the fine manners of the young Southerners brought up amidst slaves, and of the concession that young Northerners make to them. Yes, and old Northerners to old Southerners. This part of education is conducted in the nursery and the playground in fights and frolics, in business and politics. My manners in history would have been very different if my parents had been rich when I was a boy at school. Herein is good ground for our expectation of the high bearing of the English nobleman. Benjamin Rodman called his friend the naval architect a perfect ship. Mr. Hillman. New Bedford, February 12th. The days and months and years flit by, each with his own black riband, his own sad reminiscence. Yet I looked at the almanac affectionately as a book of promise. These 3 last years of my life are not a chasm. I could almost wish they were, so brilliantly sometimes the vision of Ellen's beauty and love and life come out of the darkness. Pleasantly mingled with my sad thoughts, the sublime religion of Miss Rochesterday. She was much disciplined, she said, in the years of Quaker dissension, and driven inward, driven home, to find an anchor until she learned to have no choice to acquiesce without understanding the reason when she found an obstruction to any particular course of acting. She objected to having this spiritual direction called an impression or an intimation or an oracle. It was none of them. It was so simple it could hardly be spoken of. It was long, long before she could attain to anything satisfactory. She was in a state of great dreariness, but she had a friend, a woman now deceased, who used to advise her to dwell patiently with this dreariness and absence, in the confidence that it was necessary to the sweeping away of all her dependence upon traditions, and that she would finally attain to something better. And when she attained a better state of mind, its beginnings were very, very small, and now it is not anything to speak of. She designed to go to England with Mr. and Mrs. Farrar, and the plan was very pleasant, and she was making her preparations, and the time was fixed when she conceived a reluctance to go for which she could not see any reason, but which continued, and she therefore suspended her purpose and suffered them to depart without her. She said she had seen reason to think it was best for her to have stayed at home, but in obeying it she never felt it of any importance that she should know now or at any time what the reasons were, but she should feel that it was presumption to press through this reluctance and choose for herself. I said it was not so much any particular power as a helpful state of the mind, to which she assented cordially. I said it must produce a sublime tranquillity in view of the future, this assurance of higher direction, and she assented. Can you believe, Waldo Emerson, that you may relieve yourself of this perpetual perplexity of choosing, and by putting your ear close to the soul, learn always the true way? I cannot remark how perfectly this agrees with the daimon of Socrates, even in that story which I once thought anomalous, of the direction as to the choice of two roads, and with the grand unalterable of Fichte's morality. Hold up this lamp and look back at the best passages of your life. Once there was choice in the mode, but obedience in the theme. In general, there has been pretty quiet obedience in the main, but much recusancy in the particular. Here follows a brief passage from Hamlet. Hamlet. But thou wouldst not think how ill all's here about my heart, but it is no matter. Horatio. If your mind dislike anything, obey it. And another unrelated quotation. The barber learns his art on the orphan's face. End quote. The walls of houses are transparent to the architect. Providence. Men apply themselves to events and according to their affinities, that is sweet or bitter. The good man is obedient to the laws of the world and so successful. The angel rather. Conversation with William W. Swain. Boston, February 19th. A seaman in the coach told the story of an old sperm whale which he called a white whale, which was known for many years by the whalemen as Old Tom, and who rushed upon the boats which attacked him and crushed the boats to small chips in his jaws, the men generally escaping by jumping overboard and being picked up. A vessel was fitted out at New Bedford, he said, to take him, and he was finally taken somewhere off Pt.7 by the Winslow, or the Essex. He gave a fine account of a storm, which I heard imperfectly, only, quote, the whole ocean was all feather white, end quote. A whale sometimes run off 3 rolls of cord, 300 fathom in length each one. February 20th. Self-contradiction is the only wrong, for by the laws of spirit in the right is every individual character that acts in strict consistence with itself. Coleridge's Wallenstein. February 21st. The true reasons for actions are not given. George P. Bradford says that he is so well understood at Plymouth that he can act naturally without being reckoned absurd. That is a valid reason for going there. But how many would not understand it, and how many, understanding it, would hoot at it? They think a cheaper board is a good reason for going to one house, or the prospect of making acquaintance that give parties, or the like. But such a reason as this, which affects happiness and character, seems unworthy attention. As George says, it is agreed in society to consider realities as fictions, and fictions realities. February 22nd. It were well to live purely to make your word worth something. Deny yourself cake and ale to make your testimony irresistible. Be a pure reason to your contemporaries for God and truth. What is good in itself can be bad to nobody. As I went to church, I thought how seldom the present hour is seized upon as a new moment. To a soul alive to God every moment is a new world. A new audience, a new Sabbath affords an opportunity of communicating thought and moral excitement that shall surpass all previous experience, that shall constitute an epoch, a revolution in the minds on whom you act and in your own. The awakened soul, the man of genius, makes every day such a day, by looking forward only. But the professional mob look back only to custom and their past selves. February 25th. The day is immeasurably long to him who knows how to value and to use it, said Goethe. March 2nd. It is very seldom that a man is truly alone. He needs to retire as much from his solitude as he does from society into very loneliness. While I am reading and writing in my chamber, I am not alone, though there is nobody there. There is one means of procuring solitude which to me, and I apprehend to all men, is effectual, and that is to go to the window and look at the stars. If they do not startle you and call you off from vulgar matters, I know not what will. I sometimes think that the atmosphere was made transparent with this design to give man in the heavenly bodies a perpetual admonition of God and superior destiny. Seen in the streets of cities, how great they are! When I spoke of this to Gas, he said that he had sought in his chamber a place for prayer and could not find one till he cast his eye upon the stars. New Bedford, March 15th. I have been again to Plymouth, and the families and the faces are almost as tranquil as their pines. The blue ocean reminded me of Goethe's fine observation that nature has told everything once. One illustration of it was to me this noble line of sea by which nature is pleased to reveal to the asking eye the dimensions of the globe by showing the true outline of the world. Fine objects in Plymouth from men and women down to vegetables. I saw and relished all, even to the epigea and the byssus or pulvis simplissimus, ground pine, sabbatia, and impetrum. Nature tells everything once. Yes, our microscopes are not necessary. They are a mechanical advantage for chamber philosophers. She has magnified everything somewhere. Each process, each function, each organ is disproportionately developed in some one individual. Go study it there, instead of wearing your eyes out in your 6,000,000 magnifier. I count no man much because he cows or silences me. Any fool can do that. But if his conversation enriches or rejoices me, I must reckon him wise. New Bedford, March 21st. I have been much interested lately in the MS. record of the debates in the Quakerly monthly meetings here in 1823, when Elizabeth Rodman and Mary Roch were proposed to be removed from the place of elders for uniting in the prayers of Mary Newhall. I must quote a sentence or two from two of these speakers. February 1823, M.N. rose in the meeting and began with, "As the stream does not rise higher than the fountain," etc., spoke of the Mosaic dispensation in which the performance of certain rituals constituted the required religion, the more spiritual dispensation of our Savior, of the advent of Christ, and the yet more inward and spiritual dispensation of the present day. These dispensations she compared to the progressive stages of the human heart in the work of religion, from loving our neighbor as ourselves to loving our enemies, and lastly arriving at the state of humility, when self would be totally abandoned and we could only say, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner." New Bedford. My Swedenborgian friend, Dr. Stebbins, tells me that he esteems himself measurably excused for not preaching whilst I remain here, as I am giving as much New Jerusalem doctrine as the people will bear. Fine thought in the old verse by Barber, describing Bruce's soldiers crowding around him as with new unsated curiosity after a battle. Quote, "Sic wordis spake they of their king, and for his high undertaking, forlayet and gurnet him for to see, that with him was wont to be." March 22nd. The subject that needs most to be presented, developed, is the principle of self-reliance, what it is not, what it requires, how it teaches us to regard our friends. It is true that there is a faith wholly a man's own, the solitary inmate of his own breast, which the faiths of all mankind cannot shake, and which they cannot confirm. But at the same time, how useful, how indispensable has been the ministry of our friends to us, our teachers, the living and the dead. I ask advice. It is not that I wish my companion to dictate to me the course I should take. Before God, no. It were to unman, to ungod myself. It is that I wish him to give me information about the facts, not a law as to the duty. It is that he may stimulate me by his thoughts to unfold my own, so that I may become master of the facts still. My own bosom will supply, as surely as God liveth, the direction of my course. This truth constitutes the objection to pledges. They are advocated on the principle that men are not to be trusted. They are to be trusted. They can never attain to any good until they are trusted with the whole direction of themselves, and therefore it is pernicious, it is postponing their virtue and happiness whenever you substitute a false principle for the true, in a mind capable of acting from a right motive. March 23rd. It occurs that the distinction should be drawn in treating of friendship between the aid of commodity which our friends yield us, as in hospitality, gifts, sacrifices, etc., and which, as in the old story about the poor man's will in Montaigne, are evidently esteemed by the natural mind, to use such a cant word, the highest manifestations of love; and, secondly, the spiritual aid, far more precious and leaving the other at infinite distances, which our friends afford us, of confession, of appeal, of social stimulus, mirroring ourselves. March 26th. As the flower precedes the fruit, and the bud the flower, so, long before the knowledge, comes the opinion, long before the opinion comes the instinct, that a particular act is unfriendly, unsuitable, wrong. We are wonderfully protected. March 28th. Wherever the truth is injured, defend it. You are on that spot within hearing of that word, within sight of that action, as a witness to the end that you should speak for it. Quote, "My heritage, how long and wide! Time is my heritage, my field is time." End quote. Boston, April 10th. Is it possible that in the solitude I seek I shall have the resolution, the force, to work as I ought to work, as I project in highest, most far-sighted hours? Well, and what do you project? Nothing less than to look at every object in its relation to myself. Edward wrote on the back of Alexander's portrait of Mother, taken in 1825 at the age of 57. Then there is a long Latin quotation here, and there is no translation here. And then he says, CCE proposes an improved reading of the second sentence. And then again, there is an untranslated long quotation in Latin. Then it ends with Placuit omnibus cui satis uni placuus. Epitaph on Olivia Buckminster Emerson. April 11th. Went yesterday to Cambridge and spent most of the day at Mount Auburn. Got my luncheon at Fresh Pond and went back again to the woods. After much wandering and seeing many things, 4 snakes gliding up and down a hollow for no purpose that I could see, not to eat, not for love, but only gliding, then a whole bed of Hepatica triloba, cousins of the anemone, all blue and beautiful, but constrained by niggard nature to wear their last year's faded jacket of leaves. Then a black-capped titmouse, who came upon a tree, and when I would know his name, sang chick-a-dee-dee. Then a far-off tree full of clamorous birds, I know not what, but you might hear them half a mile. I forsook the tombs, and found a sunny hollow, where the east wind would not blow, and lay down against the side of a tree to most happy beholdings. At least I opened my eyes, and let what would pass through them into the soul. I saw no more my relation, how near and petty, to Cambridge or Boston. I heeded no more what minute or hour our Massachusetts clocks might indicate. I saw only the noble earth on which I was born, with the great star which warms and enlightens it. I saw the clouds that hang their significant drapery over us. It was day, that was all heaven said. The pines glittered with their innumerable green needles in the light, and seemed to challenge me to read their riddle. The drab oak leaves of the last year turned their little somersets, and lay still again, and the wind bustled high overhead in the forest top. This gay and grand architecture, from the vault to the moss and lichen on which I lay, who shall explain to me the laws of its proportions and adornments? See the perpetual generation of good sense. Nothing wholly false, fantastic, can take possession of men who, to live and move, must plough the ground, sail the sea, have orchards, hear the robin sing, and see the swallow fly. Today I found in Roxbury the Saxifraga vernalis. April 12th. Glad to read in my old gossip, Montaigne, some robust rules of rhetoric. I will have a chapter thereon in my book. I would Thomas Carlyle should read them. Quote, in good prose, quote, said Schlegel, ? Every word should be underscored. Its place in the sentence should make its emphasis. Write solid sentences, and you can even spare punctuation. The passages in Montaigne are in Vol.3, pages 144 to 146. We are always on the brink of an ocean of thought into which we do not yet swim. We are poor lords, have immense powers which we are hindered from using. I am kept out of my heritage. Are we not ever postponing great actions and ineffable wisdom? We are ever coming up with a group of angels still in sight before us, which we refer to when we say the truth, and the wise man, and the corrections these shall make in human society. All the mistakes I make arise from the forsaking my own station, and trying to see the object from another person's point of view. I read so resolute a self-thinker as Carlyle, and am convinced of the riches of wisdom that ever belong to the man who utters his own thought with a divine confidence that it must be true if he heard it there. We live, animals in the basement story, and when Shakespeare or Milton or even my fantastical Scotchman, who fools his humor to the top of his bent, calls us up into the high region, we feel and say, "This is my region. They only show me my own property. I am in my element. I thank them for it." Presently we go about our business into the basement again, cumbered with serving, and assured of our right to the halls above, we never go thither. I had observed long since that to give the thought a just and full expression, I must not prematurely utter it. Better not talk of the matter you are writing out. It was as if you had let the spring snap too soon. I was glad to find Goethe say to the same point that, quote, he who seeks a hidden treasure must not speak, end quote. Sabbath, April 13th. There are some duties about courtesy. And were it not lawful for the discontented spirit sometimes to cry out, "Husks, husks"? Ye feed the people with words, even in their solemn assembly? They distressed me by their prayers, and all the discourse was an impertinence. There sat, too, the gifted man, and if he unlawfully withheld his word, this wearisome prose was his just punishment. Elsewhere, certainly not there, but from MME, from Carlyle, or from this delicious day, or whatever celestial fingers touch the divine harp, I woke to a strain of highest melody. I saw that it was not for me to complain of obscurity, of being misunderstood. It was not for me, even in the filthy rags of my unrighteousness, to despond of what I might do and learn. Can you not do better than clear your action to the highest of these puppets, or these potentates around you, by clearing it to your Creator, by being justified to yourself? Absolve yourself to the universe, and, as God liveth, you shall ray out light and heat, absolute good. Were it not noble gratitude, since we are the fruit of time, and owe all our immeasurable past, its nations and ages guide our pen, to live for the world, to inspect the present, and in the present report of the future for the benefit of the existing race, and having once seen that virtue was beautiful, count that portion enough, without higgling for our particular commodity to boot? Down with that fop of a Brutus! Peace to the angel of innocency for evermore. Emerson speaks on seeming disproportionate. It occurs how much friction is in the machinery of society. The material is so much that the spiritual is overlaid and lost. A man meditates in solitude upon a truth which seems to him so weighty that he proposes to impart it to his fellow men. Immediately a society must be collected, and books consulted, and much paper blotted in preparation of his discourse. Alien considerations come in, personal considerations, and finally, when he delivers his discourse, 'tis quite possible it does not contain the original message, so that it was no superfluous role he gave who said, "When you write, do not omit the thing you meant to say." The material integuments have quite overlaid and killed the spiritual child. Not otherwise it falls out in education. A young man is to be educated, and schools are built, and masters brought together, and gymnasium erected, and scientific toys and monitorial systems, and a college endowed with many professorships, and the apparatus is so enormous and unmanageable that the education or calling out of his faculties is never accomplished. He graduates a dunce. See how the French mathematics at Cambridge have quite destroyed the slender chance a boy had before of learning trigonometry. Is it otherwise in our philosophic enterprises? They wish to heal the sick, or emancipate the African, or convert the Hindu, and immediately agents are appointed, and an office established, and annual reports printed, and the least streamlet of the vast contributions of the public trickles down to the healing of the original evil. The charity becomes a job. Well, now, is it otherwise with life itself? We are always getting ready to live, but never living. We have many years of technical education, then many years of earning a livelihood, and we get sick and take journeys for our health, and compass land and sea for improvement by traveling, but the work of self-improvement, always under our nose, nearer than nearest, is seldom engaged in. A few hours in the longest life. Set out to study a particular truth, read upon it, walk to think upon it, talk of it, write about it. The thing itself will not much manifest itself, at least not much in accommodation to your studying arrangements. The gleams you do get out, they will flash as likely at dinner or in the roar of a faneuil hall as in your painfulest abstraction. Very little life in a lifetime. M.M.E. writes that the world is full of children, and what in our hearts we take no merit in, blush that it is no more generous, we expose to the weak as justification. April 20th. A good inaugural sermon from Mr. Stearns at Old South this morning, and from Mr. Frothingham this p.m., a good unfolding of the parting of Elijah and Elisha. Elijah said, "Ask what thou wilt." Who could have stood this test? To whom would it have not been a snare? But Elisha said, "Let a double portion of thy spirit be on me." The preacher should have added, I think, that the blessing descended in the asking, the prayer answered itself, as all real prayers do. Awake, arm of the Lord, awake, thou godlike that sleepest. Dear God, that sleepest in man, I have served my apprenticeship of bows and blushes, of fears and references, of excessive admiration. The whole secret of the teacher's force lies in the conviction that men are convertible, and they are. They want awakening. Get the soul out of bed, out of her deep habitual sleep, out into God's universe to a perception of its beauty, and hearing of its call, and your vulgar man, your prosy, selfish sensualist awakes, a God, and is conscious of force to shake the world. It seemed to me tonight as if it were no bad topic for the preacher to urge the talent of hearing good sermons upon their congregations. I can hear a good sermon where absurd shall hear none, and absurd shall hear worse than none. Spend the Sunday morning well, and the hours shall shine with immortal light, shall epitomize history, shall sing heavenly psalms. Your way to church shall be short as the way to the playground is to a child, and something holy and wise shall sit upon all the countenances there, and shall inspire the preacher's words with a wisdom not their own. Spend the Sunday morning ill, and you will hardly hear a good sermon anywhere. Could it be made apparent, what is really true, that the whole future is in the bottom of the heart, that in proportion as your life is spent within, in that measure are you invulnerable? In proportion as you penetrate facts for the law and events for the cause, in that measure is your knowledge real, your condition gradually conformed to a stable idea, and the future foreseen. I have laid my egg, but 'tis either old or empty. It was nobly said by Goethe that he endeavored to show his gratitude to all his great contemporaries, Humboldt, Cuvier, Byron, Scott, or whoever, by meeting them halfway in their various efforts by the activity and performances of his own mind. It is like the worthy man whom I once took up in my chaise as I rode, and who on parting told me he should thank me by rendering the same service to some future traveler. April 22nd. The most original sermon is adopted by each hearer's self-love as his old Orthodox or Unitarian or Quaker preaching. April 23rd. In desert lands, the bird alights on the barrel of the hunter's gun, and many other facts are there. But that which I would say is that every teacher acquires a cumulative inertia. The more forcible, the more eloquent have been his innovating doctrines, the more eagerly his school have crowded around him, so much the more difficult is it for him to forfeit their love to compromise his influence by advancing farther in the same track. Therefore the wise man must be wary of attaching followers. He must feel and teach that the best wisdom cannot be communicated, must be acquired by every soul for itself. And the prudent world cannot wish that the gifted Channing should advance one step, lest it be left without confidence in its conductor. Newton, April 26th. The Muses love the woods, and I have come hither to court the awful powers in this sober solitude. Whatsoever is highest, wisest, best, favor me. I will listen and then speak. To be without God in the world, who devised that pregnant expression. There is no longer distinction between the value of thoughts. To be sweet as sugar is sweet, as strong as iron is strong, wise as a miser, happy as a drunkard, is the whole compass of his speculation. And he is left in how terrible a solitude. The hopes that cheered him, the glorious affections that made a sky over all he knew, the unseen powers that watched the tenderness, his education, that knit his yet imperfect endeavors to the great cause of goodness and to the universe that labors for it, the fellowship of all great men working earnestly in the world, the smiles and auspices of departed heroes, yea, and the right and power to rejoice in anything that is won or done, all depart from him. He is alone in a barren and mean solitude. He bitterly feels that he must yield the palm of real dignity to the meanest worm or fly, for they are not tormented with the consciousness of total worthlessness as he is. Do you not see that wherever the wise, the good man goes, light springs up in his path? He carries meaning to every dead symbol. The Creator is in his heart and illustrates and affects his world through the hands of his servant. But the evil man, that is, the atheist, goes up and down, and all is dark and pernicious. Rain, rain, the good rain like a bad preacher does not know when to leave off. God is promoted by the worst. Don't despise even the Neelands and Andrew Jacksons. In the great cycle they find their place, and like the insect that fertilizes the soil with worm casts, or the scavenger's buzzard, that removes carrion, they perform a beneficence they know not of, and cannot hinder if they would. I saw a hawk today, wheeling up to heaven in a spiral flight, in every circle becoming less to the eye till he vanished into the atmosphere. What could be more in unison with all the pure and brilliant images? Yet is the creature an unclean greedy eater, and all his geography from that grand observatory was a watching of barnyards, or an inspection of moles and field mice. So with the pelican, crane, and the tribes of seafowl, disgusting gluttons all. Yet observe how finely in nature all these disagreeable individuals integrate themselves into a cleanly and pleasing whole. This is the end of Part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 25. In the next video, we will continue with the journal collection number 25, taking up in April 27th of the year 1834. Emerson is age 30. Thank you for listening.